It took me exactly 1 year to go completely broke. Honestly, I think you learn these, unfortunately, from the school of hard knocks, unless you get a good mentor, right? You need mentorship, you need coaching, and they're two totally different things. But you need mentorship and coaching so that you don't have to repeat in errors that have already been committed and learn lessons that have already been learned.
Hey everyone, Dr. Ryan Wakeham here, your endgame coach, successful entrepreneur, and board certified psychiatrist. I appreciate you joining our inaugural podcast with someone, very special guest of mine, near and dear to my heart, actually one of my mentors, kind of on my path to today, as well as other areas of my life. I'm excited to share with you some of our hot topics that we've been sharing on our other social media platforms. Ones that are particularly useful as we talk about moving into the new year, transitioning from 2022 into 2023 in the context of a recession. So I'm excited to give you some great content today. I look forward to the interview with my, again, very special guest, and I will bring him into the conversation now.
Hey, what's up, Dr. Ryan, the endgame coach? Great to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
I'm truly honored that you're on the show with me, my very first podcast as the endgame coach. I would be remiss if I didn't give everyone your name. You are Dr. Shawn Dill, chiropractic extraordinaire. You've never manipulated my spine, but I'm sure you do a great job for others. I think you specialize in cervical, but I know that you're really here today as, again, one of my mentors, one of my coaches, who has given me a path to becoming the end game coach. I know I approached you as this idea came to me going through due diligence with a private equity group, and finding myself in that moment in time, really hoping that I knew more, really not knowing what I didn't know, having thought I knew a lot at that point, and understanding that at that moment in time, I really could have used other help. I really could have used the coach or mentor. And unfortunately, I didn't find you until many months later. But again, you've been a critically important part of my life, getting me here today. And I'm just super excited to have you on the podcast.
Well, I'm super excited to be here. Super proud of everything that you have built. It's one of those things like when you say like, well, none of us know what we don't know until we know that we don't know it, right? And so being witness to this journey, I'm very excited because I also know how many people also don't know that they don't know the things that you know. And for someone to have gone through the process of selling a business, commonly in the entrepreneurial space, going through an exit, that's sort of the holy grail, right? Everybody wants to do that. But that process in and of itself is full of tons of things that we don't know that we don't know. And so I'm really excited to not to impart information onto you because you're the one that has the information, but to serve as a guide to help you to bring that information to more people. And this podcast is one of those platforms. So knowing it's the first episode, I always tell you, not very many people are going to be listening to this one, but later on, as you gain traction, people may come back and say, I want to hear the first episode. And so if you're one of those people that's going back in time because you wanted some nostalgia and you wanted to see just how did the endgame coach get their start in the podcasting world, I'm very excited. And that also means that if you're coming backwards in time to this, that Ryan has been successful in creating a personal brand and in launching the podcast. That's why you were like, I wonder what the first one sound like. So I'm super excited to be here, lay some foundational stuff for all of the people, one, listening to the first episode, but also people coming back to listen to this.
Yeah, I'm sure if they're coming back to listen to it and watch it, for that matter, hopefully I haven't gotten any grayer in my appearance, and I'm sure or hope that you look as young and fresh as you do now. So
maybe we'll hope.
maybe we'll impose some greatness there too. But Shawn, again, thanks again. a couple of topics I wanted to make sure to touch on, as I alluded to at the beginning. There's a few things that seem to strike a chord with maybe my audience. However, more specifically, things that strike a chord with me, and things that I did find to be important in my journey, into and through diligence and an exit with a private equity group. And frankly, part of the reason why I chose to go the route was I had some blind spots in areas that I now know were blind spots, because again, I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. And so, for me, one of those hot button topics is truly that, what's the barriers between some, founder, entrepreneur, business owner operator. What's the barrier between where they are today and where they want to be in terms of scaling a business? I know that can be a very broad term for a lot of people, or a very broad concept. But as you think about, what you've done in your entrepreneurial career, what have you seen as being some of those hot, barriers or areas of the business that really limit you from scale?
Well, first of all, I think super important to sort of define or just make sure that we've clarified the difference between growth and scale. So, growth in my mind is very linear. It kind of boils down to money in, money out. We find a formula, and then we are able to extract more. We're able to get more out of the bottom line by putting more onto the top line. And what's in between those are your expenses. And oftentimes the expenses drive that top line revenue. When we're in growth mode, we spend more on marketing, we hire additional people. And so when we do that, we get more top line revenue, but we're spending more. And sometimes people get a little frustrated there. Scale occurs when those two things separate. So we're not linear. We're able to produce more top line revenue without necessarily the same corresponding expense increase. And so that's when we are looking at in growth. So what gets in the way of scaling, and potentially even that next step after I have scaled, even into entertaining or going through an exit? Number one for me is going to be mindset. And it really is interesting because we've kind of embedded this. You don't know what you don't know. Maybe that's the title of the podcast, but we have this concept. But I talk about this a lot. I remember very clearly for myself and for my wife, Lacey, when we would, at the end of a year, we would say, wow, we're so close to making six figures with our business. When we make six figures, everything's going to be different. And then you make six figures, and it's not that different because you're in growth. And then I remember very clearly being with Lacey and saying, man, we're so close to $500,000. Well, we make $500,000. Oh man, that's going to really be different. I remember being so close to seven figures and pushing five and scaling up. And the thing is that you truly don't know what you don't know. You don't know what it's like to be a millionaire. And if you're a millionaire, you don't know what it's like to be a decamillionaire. If you're a decamillionaire, you don't know what it's like to be a centimillionaire. And if you're a centimillionaire, you don't know what it's like to be a billionaire. These all bring different challenges and also different risk equations. And different problems and obstacles that arise depending on where you are. And so number one that stops people is we just don't know. We have a limited mindset. I look back at those times. I'm like, Shawn, why were you only wanting to make six figures? But that's literally at that time all I wanted to do. Second thing that I think stops people is tactical knowledge. Now, if you don't know mindset wise, so sort of abstract, esoteric, I don't know what it's like. I don't know what challenges and problems I'll face. So oftentimes, we just had the World Cup finals, or you think about something like the Super Bowl. If you're an athlete, but you've never been in the Super Bowl, you have a disadvantage. And this gets talked about a lot. Oh, this team has a lot of people that have played in the Super Bowl. Well, what difference does that make? It's just another football game, but it's not, right? So it's that same thing. Like in business, the people that have been there have an advantage over the people that frankly haven't been there. And the other thing is that it operates differently as we grow. The operations of a low six-figure business and the operations of a low seven-figure business are two totally different things. But the operations of a low seven-figure business and the operations of a mid or high seven-figure business are two totally different things. So tactically, we don't understand. You and I have a lot of conversations about this because we don't know how to do accounting at scale. We don't know how to do marketing at scale. We don't know how to do sales at scale. We know how to do it mom and pop because that's how we came up. But frankly, we become our own limitations in the deal.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And you've obviously read my mind, or read my material, because for me, one of the key barriers to scale you've already mentioned is mindset, right? And so there's all this scarcity mindset, and you don't know what you don't know, and your mind gets in the way of a whole lot of things every day. As you know, I'm a board certified psychiatrist by trade, so I happen to be quite the expert at the mind. And and we don't talk about how we get better in a mindset perspective, right? Like, I actually just recently did some material on this, which is, we talk about new year, new me. That's almost always vanity in nature. It's almost always how you might look better. But we rarely talk about a new year, new me from a mindset perspective, right? And so when I think about where I became ultimately successful, is when I really started focusing on myself, not vanity, but when I started focusing on my mindset. When I got that right, that created the foundation through which I could be successful in the other, you know, uh, avenues of my life, so that I could overcome the hurdles to scale in some of these other areas. So I couldn't agree with you more on that. You mentioned finances. You mentioned kind of this concept of not linear, revenue in, revenue out. There is this concept, as you know, of escaping gravity, where there's economies of scale based on your size. And again, that's something that they don't teach you in medical school. I'm sure they don't teach you in chiropractic school. So along those lines, how did you learn that? Like, what was the aha moment for you when you said, if we keep growing, there's actually this ability to save money in these areas and thereby create more margin, create more cash flow to then go invest in other areas of the business, or in the growth of the business into a different location, let's say. What can you give me an example when that aha moment occurred for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I agree, and I think that probably a lot of your audience is in that healthcare space, and it is true. Like, we don't learn these topics. We don't even talk about these things as we're learning our trade. But I always, I serve as the chair of the board of Sherman Chiropractic College, an educational institution for chiropractors. And I always think, like, our charge is to create great chiropractors. And everybody's like, well, how come we don't learn how to, but how come we don't learn business? But if you were going to culinary arts school, they're not teaching you ordering and hiring. They're not teaching you about payroll taxes. And that's one of the challenges that people, chefs have. They all want to own their own restaurant, but they don't know how to run it. And so they have big challenges there. So I was no different. I graduated chiropractic college. I went out and practiced in Costa Rica. My first practice was in San Jose, Costa Rica. So not only did I not know what I was doing, I didn't speak fluent Spanish. So, I mean, I was just in double jeopardy. It took me exactly 1 year to go completely broke. And so, honestly, I think you learn these, unfortunately, from the school of hard knocks, unless you get a good mentor, right? You need mentorship, you need coaching, and they're two totally different things. But you need mentorship and coaching so that you don't have to repeat in errors that have already been committed and learn lessons that have already been learned. Well, I wasn't that smart. So that's how I kind of learned that. At the end of 1 year, I had to face a decision, either to kind of throw in the towel on my business or to just bite down and make one last go on it, scraping pennies together. Fortunate for me, after my second year, I was having great success. And then I was in the same boat that everybody else is in. You're making money, but you're like, wow, I make a ton of money, but I spend a ton of money. And I'm not talking about, like, going out clubbing and that. I'm just talking about, like, it costs a lot of money to run this business. And that's when you're at a crossroads. And a lot of people learn it and a lot of people don't. Now, if you have mentorship and guidance, you're going to learn it a lot easier. But you all of a sudden have to have a realization that, look, if I brought on, the first thing for me was, if I brought on another person and another doctor and they worked here, it wouldn't have to pay double rent. So just that right there is an example. I don't have to pay for the office twice. I don't have to necessarily double up the staff to make that work. So, wow, I can double up on my revenue if the other person could produce what I was producing without doubling up on the expenses. So I tried it and brought down one of my dearest and best friends, Dr. Andy Roberts. Not easy to convince someone to come to Costa Rica. It would be to go for vacation, but not to live. And he came down, and man, right there, that was when I got my first taste of it, and we were off to the races.
That's you've told me that story actually in the past, and it's an incredibly empowering story. So it speaks to that perseverance in the face of adversity, and yeah, that again, it's a great story. You've mentioned the word linear a few times, and I want to tie that back for the audience around the idea of coaching and mentorship. I know they're different, however, again, it's something I've talked about before, which is even Tiger at his peak had a coach, right? The greatest golfer of all time still had a coach. And you've mentioned kind of dummy tax and this linear way of thinking or growing when you don't have a coach or a mentor. So someone like that can really change the speed in which you can achieve an endpoint, because again, you're not having to make unoriginal mistakes, right? You can truly pay, you can leverage someone else's payment on dummy taxes and use someone else's knowledge and experience to truly exponentially improve that learning curve. And then that's where you can really escape gravity through not just financial economics of a business, but personal growth and growth in other areas too. So I think I'll just reiterate how important that concept of linear versus exponential growth in learning can be, and how important a coach is in that process. You mentioned something else that I know I've shared with you as being a concept I didn't fully understand when I started. I know what it means now, but it was actually also critically important in my life story, which is this concept of asymmetric risk, right? So yours was was a little more symmetrical. You moved to Costa Rica. There wasn't necessarily a lifeline, so to speak, until you just kind of bared through it and got on the other side. But the other thing I see a lot in terms of successful entrepreneurs, especially those who can grow and scale a business and maybe do that across different service lines or different businesses, is this concept of asymmetric risk, which is, for the audience, it is this ability to take risks, but do it in a way that if you fail, there's way less downside as there is upside, right? So that your upside potential could be 100x, your downside potential might be, you may have lost nothing by doing it, or very little anyway. And so an example of that for me was I was a resident when I opened my first office, right? So I was in residency, I was finalizing training as a psychiatrist. My whole outpatient private practice could have blown up in smoke, and I still would have finished residency. I still was getting paid during residency, and still would have gone on to be a psychiatrist. I wouldn't be sitting here today having this interview with you. But that's a perfect example of asymmetric risk, right? I was able to leverage a little bit of time and energy in an idea, but have the kind of the backside protection of still in residency, still had a job, still had a career, even if everything failed. Is there, can you point to an example in your life where you've been able to leverage asymmetric risk in, one of your businesses or in a career choice of yours?
Yeah, absolutely. We have over time found ourselves in multiple businesses. I think one of the best ones that I can think of is our recent commitment to open 7 Everbowl stores. It started out as we were only going to open 2. It was in partnership with one of my partners, Grant Dennis. And we were at an event. And I said, I bet I could raise, if we would sell half of our equity in this venture, I could raise enough money that could get us to 7 stores, and that would diversify our holding and mitigate our risk. Because if we only have 2 stores and one of the stores, let's say in worst case scenario, fails, Well, then 50% of the venture is in trouble. If I could get to 7 stores using other people's capital, I get diversified across. And sure, I only now own 25%, but I own 25% of 7 stores, which to me was better than 50% of 2 stores. That's one example. But I also want to speak to that because I know in your example, and in many people's example, it also your risk becomes much higher as you get older. So in your example, you were young, and so you had a fallback. And I think that, I was having a conversation earlier today with a young entrepreneur. He's in his 20s, I believe he's 25. I said, "Well, are you married?" And he said, "No." I said, "Do you own a home?" He said, "No." I said, "Do you own a car?" He said, "Yes." I said, "So basically, if we went out and leveraged you against $1 million of debt, the only real thing that could happen is they take your car, and maybe you have to declare bankruptcy, and we deal with that for a number of years with your credit." But there's far less risk. Now, what about me? And what about you, Dr. Ryan? Multiple homes, multiple assets. The risk becomes exponentially more the more success that you have. And so I also think that part of this asymmetric risk is knowing how to push your chips in early, which is tough because you don't have the knowledge base to feel confident about doing it, which again, right back to that's why you would lean on someone like you. So if I was going through an exit and I knew you had done it, but I was scared to do it, but I was young, I'll be like, well, let me just get Ryan to help me because you know what? Let's say that it just completely got ruined and the deal was off. Well, I still have enough time that I could build it back up and then go back to bat again with this. Whereas, if you were in your 70s, oh, you probably don't have enough time to redo the whole business and build it back up and make another run at it.
Yeah, no, those are all really good points. Where you are in your career arc and your lifespan definitely play a role in how asymmetric the risk really needs to be in order for you to truly maybe take that next step. So that's not something I've actually thought about before, but makes perfect sense. I think the final thing I would want to talk about today is I think about, again, a couple of key topics that I want to hit on in this very first inaugural podcast with my very own coach, Dr. Shawn Dill, is, we talked about a little bit this mindset mentality, but as a psychiatrist, I've always kind of taught and been educated around the idea of a mind body connection. And we did talk about new year, new you, the vanity, everyone does, cleanses and diet and exercise and all these commitments for the year that they don't ever keep. But beyond just truly mentally changing your mindset and working through personal development and listening to people like yourself or David Meltzer or Tony Robbins, beyond investing time in just personal development and mindset changing, there's a certain reality of creating the foundation for a healthy mindset. And that does have to include diet. That does have to include exercise. That does have to include good sleep. That does have to include coping mechanisms that are not unhealthy, right? So drinking a bunch of alcohol to sleep better doesn't actually work. And what reminds me of it most with you specifically, again, something else we share in common, as you know, I own a juice bar myself. And so the concept of Everbowl and kind of eating cleaner, eating healthier, for me, it's always been this idea of you get out of your body what you put into it. And when you put junk in, you're going to get junk out. And so, the Everbowl analogy around asymmetric risk just reminded me of how important it is for your mindset that you're putting the right thing in your body. And again, diet, exercise, sleep, coping mechanisms. So again, going back to some of the earlier comments, what other than Everbowl, what are some other examples you've seen be successful for yourself or others as it relates to that kind of the physical foundation for a healthy mindset?
Well, it's funny because that also falls into the same category of age. When you're 20, yeah, I saw a post on social media the other day. Somebody wrote, they literally wrote, "I live on Red Bull." I was like, oh, when you're 20, that's normal. Red Bull, coffee, Monster energy drink. When you're 50, in your 50s, like me, you begin to say, that's not that's not going to produce long-term results. And in fact, it's damaging to me. When you're 20, you could do, I have friends in their 20s, entrepreneurs that do like 2 or 3 day stints, no sleep. When you're 50, for me, that's impossible. I can't do that. So also, I think with age, you begin to have a consciousness of, look, either I'm going to run myself into the ground, which that's not going to be productive for me, or I'm going to have to become more conscious of this. I am huge on this kick. Dr. Sinclair is talking about a lot of this reversing aging. Dr. Sinclair is talking about aging being a medical diagnosis. And this is interesting, but today we can do blood tests and we can type your biological age. And Dana White made this pretty popular because they can begin to predict with a degree of accuracy when you would die based off of your biological age, based off of a lot of these biological markers. But the good news is that you can change them. And here's the concept. What if you could reduce your biological age by 1 year every calendar year? If you could do that, then theoretically you would be able to live forever. I'm not here saying that could be done. But when we talk about productivity, when we talk about impact, and we talk about legacy, I do agree 1,000,000% that your physical well-being is instrumental and key to you being able to fulfill your life's purpose in those areas. This goes way beyond how much money you make. This goes into your relationships, your lasting purpose. This goes into legacy, your family, all of that. And so I am very intrigued. My health and wellness routine includes stem cells. It includes peptide injections. It includes cold therapy, red light therapy, infrared sauna. Of course, in my realm, all of these things natural, a lot of supplements. I know there's a lot of breakthroughs going on with things like metformin, all these different things. I just saw that NMN though was banned by the FDA. I'm not sure why they chose to do that. I do take NAD plus. So yeah, I'm very into seeing what we can do, and in my mind, naturally, to give our bodies an unfair advantage as we adapt our ways through the ever-changing world that we live in, and as our bodies age. Nobody wants to get old.
Yes. Well, when you crack the Benjamin Button code, let me know. Clearly,
well, they've done it. They've done it with rats, and so yeah. I mean, putting anything that they're doing like that into humans and any sort of trial is going to be probably not in our lifetime, frankly. But yeah, that is something that we just have to fight and try and get as much information as we can. But I got to tell you too, in my world, stuff is very common amongst entrepreneurs, right? Like all my entrepreneur friends do this stuff.
Right. No, you're right. I mean, the anti-aging science is it's incredible how far it's come even just the last 5 years, let alone 10 plus, with the plunges and a lot of the stuff you're talking about. So no, I think the longer you can stay around, the more asymmetric risk, or maybe you'll figure out the opposite equation on the asymmetric risk piece too. Just with
you would, because you would know you had more time, right? If you knew that,
yeah.
It would definitely change the way that you calculated risk. Correct. For sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're coming up on time. I really appreciate you taking the time for this interview with me as my coach, and someone with all the successes and the looks that you have because of your anti-aging that I'm probably gonna have to call you up afterwards and get some more information about. But what's that final word of wisdom or advice you give me or the audience listening in, maybe from 5 years from now? What's that final word of advice you would have for me as the end game coach, and you knowing what you know, and this being the first podcast?
Yeah, I'm going to tie it to this being the first podcast. My mantra, my teaching mantra, what I would love to be known for is the saying that history remembers people who had who had a desire to make an impact stronger than their desire to please. And it's easy to fall into this, it's not perfect, or what will people say? And history remembers those that had a conviction to step out and say, look, it doesn't matter. And when I think about people like Rosa Parks, going to jail, I think about Martin Luther King, I think about Nelson Mandela, I think about everybody who stepped out and was like, look, it may not be perfect, but I'm going to step out because I have a conviction. And the pleasing part would have been to sit in the front of the bus, would have been to go along with the current. And so I'm super proud of you for putting out this podcast. And I hope that anybody that's facing anything that they're like, I don't know if I should do that. Well, you just have to have a conviction that is stronger than your desire to please. And if you have that conviction and you act on it, look, in the look back period, I'm sure it wasn't pleasant for Rosa Parks at the time, but in the look back period, you have the potential to really impact humanity. And so I hope that this podcast goes on to be something extremely meaningful and impactful for literally thousands of entrepreneurs who dream of an exit. And I hope that this becomes the source for them to get their information and inspiration to know that they can do that.
Well, I really appreciate those words, Shawn, and I'm super excited for the opportunity to continue to work closely with you, but more importantly, or as importantly, work closely with other entrepreneurs who are looking to do what I've been able to do, but also looking to learn and continue to grow together. And that's if I can create that footprint and impact, I certainly would be better for it. So, okay. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for listening in to our inaugural podcast with our very special guest and my mentor, Dr. Shawn Dill. This is the Endgame podcast with Dr. Ryan Wakeham, and I look forward to talking to you all soon.